It may be opening day in the baseball world, but it's decision day here in the recruiting world. A pair of 5 stars making their commitments, Duce Robinson from the 2023 class and Jaden Davis from 2024. But we'll tell you why Duce's decision tonight isn't the end of his recruitment. Plus, the Vols landing a top 10 quarterback today. We'll tell you what it means for Rocky Top. And we'll show you how the Razorbacks are wooing some top talent. All that and more as the college football recruiting show starts right now. Alongside Blair and Gulo, I'm Emily Proud. Please submit some questions in the chat. Already a lively chat right now, and the only way you can do that, though, is by subscribing to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Also, please like this video. We already have 25 likes. Would love to get to 100. It lets us know that you're watching, so you go ahead, hit that like button. We're going to hit the headlines. Blair, sound the alarms. It is finally happening at 9:30 Eastern tonight. The final uncommitted 5-star of the 2023 class will make his commitment. Duce Robinson plans to make it known on his Instagram page. Georgia and USC have, of course, been the favorites for a while. Blair, your crystal ball is for the Trojans to land the tight end, but once his commitment is locked in, what's next?
Well, I don't believe this will be over. As we've detailed on this show before, Duce Robinson is a multi-sport star, and we'll be keeping a close eye on the MLB draft this summer to see where he gets his name called. And if that happens, we could be in for another holding pattern to see what Duce and his family decide to do.
All right, that happened, or that will happen. This did happen. Earlier today, 4-star quarterback Jake Merklinger committing to Tennessee. You watched it live right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. He is the 6th commit for the Vols 2024 class. Blair, you're speaking to Big Orange Nation right now. What do they need to know about their new QB?
Get excited, because Jake is not afraid of competition, and that's how you build a culture. It would have been easy for Jake to commit elsewhere, maybe avoid having to battle a guy by the name of Nico Iamaleava, but he's saying he wants to be a Vol, and that should get Tennessee fans really excited.
All right, another 2024 top quarterback coming off the board tomorrow. That's 5-star Jaden Davis, the number 2 QB in the class. He will announce his decision at 1:30 Eastern. He's deciding between Michigan, Clemson, Ohio State, North Carolina, and Tennessee. The Wolverines lead the crystal ball. Blair, where are you leaning?
Michigan. You have to like the Wolverines here. There's been a ton of smoke on Davis and Michigan every time he makes it up to Ann Arbor. Other quarterbacks have essentially been told to look elsewhere. So I'm thinking that Jim Harbaugh is in a great spot here heading into the announcement.
Be sure to tune in to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel for instant reaction immediately following that announcement. But to more commitment news here. 24 offensive tackle Anthony Knapp committing to Notre Dame right here on this very YouTube channel. Very busy the last couple days. Knapp marks the 9th commitment in Notre Dame's top 5 class. What did the Irish just pick up?
Another talented offensive lineman to put into that room. There aren't too many prospects or at other schools right now that are producing NFL prospects at that position. And Notre Dame is a great fit for Anthony Knapp. He has the physical traits and the toughness that the Irish have been thriving with.
Well, things continue to change in the Dylan Raiola recruitment. Check that box for today. Director of Recruiting Steve Wilfong flipping his crystal ball back to Georgia for the number 1 player. Blair, you're sticking with the Trojans. Why?
Well, he's still got another visit to Los Angeles, and unless he cancels that trip back to USC, I still like where Lincoln Riley has this recruitment heading. There's obviously a lot of ebb and flows. It seems to be changing every week. And I have to think that Lincoln Riley will have a really good shot at making that last pitch and trying to get him back into the boat with the Trojans.
All right, well, that commitment may continually change, but what never changes is our excitement to welcome in our friend Brandon Huffman. Huff, we got a few rule changes coming down the block in the recruiting world. Pete Thamel reporting on them just a couple days ago. But before we get into those individual rules, we know coaches are exhausted with this current calendar. When and if these changes pass, I mean, how do you think they'll impact the recent trend of coaches just jumping ship and getting out of the college game.
Yeah, I think what's been fascinating is how many young, recruiting, energetic guys have made the jump from the collegiate game to the NFL. You know, guys that were just playing college football 5 or 6 years ago, had college jobs, they're taking NFL jobs, like Michael Hutchings, who we saw at USC a few years ago. Then he was coaching in Western Kentucky. He goes to the NFL. Jamar Cain, one of the best recruiters in the SEC and the Big 12 before that, and the Pac-12, he goes to the NFL. So when the younger, energetic guys are going to the NFL, that makes you think that the guys that have been around the college game for a long time, they're ready to make that move. So now with these rule changes, if they go into effect, it's going to lessen how much time these guys have to be on the road and potentially keep these guys in the collegiate game a lot longer than them making that jump to the NFL.
Huff, let's go through some of these proposed changes. Coaches would now be able to visit prospects in January of their junior year. How do you think this would impact the recruiting process?
Well, I mean, the reality is, Blair, you and I both know that those visits were happening already. They were maybe the long handshake that went on for 15, 20 minutes, but now you're going to be able to have more one-on-one personal meetings. Instead of having to wait until December to do those in-homes, you can do those in January. You can now do them in the spring beginning in 2024, and now you can start locking up your class that much earlier, start building that relationship, especially with dead periods that have been put into place. Now you get a chance to get ahead of those dead periods in the spring and have that one-on-one time with those guys. So now instead of having to wait 11 months to have that in-home visit when a kid's a senior and he's exhausted with the process, you get him while he's still eager to know about the process, so you can build that better relationship, maybe meet with mom and dad. And I think that's something that's going to help these classes become that much stronger that much earlier.
Extended visits and when they can happen will also apparently change. Coaches could now take them during the spring eval period as well as some other months outside of December, which has been a chaotic month to say the least. So how would this change the way that coaches put together their class?
Well, I mean, you think about how December, how crazy that it gets, and you're 2 weeks, 3 weeks away from the early signing period beginning. You got most of the heavy lifting done in the spring and in the summer, but now you've had your season. Maybe you had a bad season when you expected it to be good. Maybe on the flip side, you had a better season than you expected. You also have your own roster that you have to maintain of guys that are thinking about going into the portal. So now in November, December, coaches are having to spend as much time trying to keep their roster intact as they are trying to develop their future roster. By allowing them more flexibility in the spring and in the summer, that allows them to focus on that time of year to be about their long-term plan, to be about their future classes, and then they can spend more of their energy in November and December holding on to the guys that may be thinking about going to the portal or portal diving themselves. But it kind of breaks up the timing where it's not all about recruiting and the transfer portal in November, December. You did most of that recruiting heavy lifting back in the spring and summer with more enhancements. Now you can just worry about maintaining your roster in the fall.
The timing as to when schools can make that initial contact would also be different. Right now, coaches have to wait until September 1st of the junior year of that player's calendar in terms of his classification. How would that impact the process, and how do you think that rule changes things?
Well, again, I love when you go on Twitter and you see coaches tweet, hey, 2025s, we can't respond to you for a while, but we're not ignoring you. Again, they're in communication with those guys. They're acting like, that communication doesn't exist. It just might have to go through a third party, a trainer, a quarterback coach, a high school head coach, whoever it may be. But now that allows for those relationships to be much more personal and one-on-one. No longer do they have to send a direct message via digital messaging saying, hey, call me. Now they can call them. Now they can get in touch with those guys much earlier. With the recruiting calendar expedited, the recruiting process has been expedited, and everything's happening much sooner. So the earlier those coaches can build that one-on-one relationship, whether it be a direct phone call when they're a sophomore as opposed to having to wait, that's going to be something that's valuable in the recruitment of each of these recruits. And I think, again, coaches are looking for ways to be aggressive and get ahead, but also not being hamstrung by the calendar, and also not feeling like, hey, my rivals are doing a better job of recruiting him, but I'm following the rules. Now the rules get a little bit more blurred, if you will, and coaches can maybe be on a much more even playing field.
So a lot of the rules that we just talked about seem like they expand the calendar and add more days, but one of the biggest changes actually involves the reduction of days during those eval periods in the fall. It'll drop from 42 to 33 and then total days, and then from 186 to 40 in the spring. So how will coaches react to this change, Huff?
with a big smile, probably a cigar like Dan Lanning smoked on signing day. They will be happy to be off the road. Now, again, you've got 10 assistant coaches full-time on staff. Maybe 5 of those guys like to recruit. They like the energy that recruiting brings them. But then there's another 5 guys that they're there for their X's and O's acumen. And they dread having to be on the road during that 6-week period. They're away from their family. They're flying out on Sunday night. They're coming home on Friday. And then during the fall, they're coaching. And then they get a bye week. They don't have a game. They don't have preparation for that game. But a lot of them end up being thrown on the road to go recruit that week. So now with less days on the road that they're allowed to be at, they can either focus on their families during the spring. They can focus on, their spring football. A lot of these coaches will be on the road in April while they're still undergoing spring football at their school. And then during the fall, they can maybe get a week off from having to go on the road. They can reconnect with their family. They can reconnect with their position room. But taking more days off the road during the season and during the spring is not going to be something that most coaches are going to be upset about. Instead, it's going to be something they absolutely embrace.
Finally, Huff, the number of coaches and off-campus recruiters is staying the same, at least for now. How important is it for head coaches to see that number grow?
I think that, it's not just the head coaches, but I think going back to what I said about some of those coaches that are brought on for their X's and O's, they would be fine not having to go on the road. When you've got young recruiting assistants, directors of player personnel, director of recruiting staffers, those are the guys that you want to turn loose on the road. Most of those guys have connections in certain areas, at certain schools, so you'd rather be able to utilize their expertise in those regions, on the road, at those schools. And I think head coaches would like for their coaches their assistant coaches to just be working on how can we be better in the fall. If that means keeping my offensive and defensive coordinator back home, then that's great. If my OC needs to go on the road and watch guys throw, so be it. But I can throw these younger assistant coaches on the road, let them do what they're really good at. And that's, the reality is a lot of these coaches that are on the road, those direct messages, those phone calls, those text messages are being done by these recruiting staffers, and they don't necessarily have the relationship with these kids. So now you give those younger guys an opportunity to go on the road, and you maintain a little bit more freshness with those coaches that are having to go on the road year round. So I think college head coaches would love to be able to utilize their younger staffers than maybe their full-time assistants for recruiting purposes.
Huff, thank you so much for the clarity you've provided on all of this. It is very confusing, but it sounds like a lot of common sense rules that they're implementing.
You bet. Thanks, guys.
If you want to read more about this, Huff actually has a great piece online at 247sports.com right now. He goes rule by rule, gives his take. He and the rest of the national recruiting team have some great content up, so go check it out online. All right, our War Daddy series continues, and once again, another defensive lineman is the pick. Here's national recruiting analyst Allen Trieu.
Chicago St. Ignatius defensive tackle Justin Scott is definitely one of the most sought-after prospects in the 2024 class in the Midwest, and becoming one of the most sought-after players in the country. That is because defensive tackle is a premium position, and players like Justin with that size at 6'4", 310 pounds, and his athleticism don't come along very often. That is why he rose recently to become a top 40 prospect in the country on 24/7 Sports, and is knocking on the door of 5-star status. He is already a 5-star per the 24/7 Sports composite. And Scott spent a lot of his winter and spring on the basketball court. That was actually his first love. He did not pick up football until his freshman year of high school, and that athleticism on the basketball court still stands out. And it translates over to the football field, where he is a penetrator at defensive tackle. He can rush the passer. He makes a lot of plays in the backfield, and really could be a Power 5 offensive line prospect as well if he wanted to. He's very fluid. He can bend and get leverage, and made a lot of plays and improvement in between his sophomore and junior seasons. But the fact that he only picked up football going into his high school career is why the upside is so high, and why schools are so excited about him, as well as our evaluators at 24/7 Sports. And he did narrow down his list to 8 back in the winter, but there were some other schools still hanging around outside of that top 8. He also had planned to make a decision in late January, but delayed in order to be able to visit other programs. Notre Dame right now is viewed as the leader in the clubhouse. He has 24/7 Sports crystal ball predictions for the Irish, and he just returned to campus for an unofficial visit. The Irish not only have relationships going for them, but Scott mentioned that he and his mother have noted the academics in South Bend as well. The main challengers to Notre Dame at this point include Georgia, who offered him in January and were part of the reason that he decided to delay his decision in order to be able to visit Athens. Initially, he set an official for April to see Georgia, but has moved that back to the first week of June. Georgia has built a relationship with him with defensive line coach Trey Scott coming up for a basketball game and staying in consistent communication. And they've had some success at that defensive line position with players like Trayvon Walker, Jalen Carter, and others recently becoming top NFL prospects. So that he has that defensive line history behind them, and he's going to get his first look at campus in June. Scott also has an official visit set in June with Ohio State. That will be the final week in June that prospects can take official visits. He's built relationships with several members of the Buckeye staff, including defensive line coach Larry Johnson, who he has said is one of the best in the country as that position coach. He took an unofficial visit to see a game in the fall in Columbus. This will be his first time back in some time, so it'll give the Buckeyes a chance to help catch up with the Fighting Irish. There are also several other schools still hanging around in this. Scott told me recently he wants to visit Michigan and possibly Wisconsin in the spring. He also had strong visits with USC and Miami back in the fall and could look to schedule official visits with those schools. Alabama, Colorado, Oregon, those are some of the other schools that he's included amongst his top schools in the past. Scott said he would like to make a decision before his senior season if possible, but is not beholden to that if he does not feel these visits will help him make a clear decision. He could take that decision into the fall if he feels he needs more time. But the goal right now, take some visits in the spring, take those officials in the summer, and try to come to a decision before his senior season.
Closer to the NFL draft, we'll continue to highlight the high school recruitments of some of the top players in this talented group. You might recognize a few of them. If you remember, on Tuesday, we talked with Andrew Ivins about Anthony Richardson and Zay Flowers. Today, we are asking Blair about two prospects. The first, how about Bijan Robinson? The former five-star in the 2020 class was also the #1 running back in the country. In an evaluation you wrote back in 2018, you said his upside was a first-round pick. I mean, pat on the back, well done. It looks like that's what's going to happen. What do you remember about him as a high school prospect?
The first time that I saw him, Emily, was after his freshman season at a 7-on-7 tournament. And this is a thing that you don't really see running backs doing, right? It's 7-on-7, so it's passing downfield. Running backs aren't really a part of the game or part of that action. But he was out there playing receiver and looked really seamless. And I'm like, okay, I need to jot down his name. I'm going to have to keep track of him here for the next few years. And sure enough, when you watched him develop out there in Tucson, Arizona at South Point Catholic, you just saw the burst. You saw the I think the aggressiveness that he ran with, the vision that he had. He used to just glide past defenders, and you would look at his stat line, and it looked kind of incredible. It was ridiculous. He was averaging close to 15 yards per carry. It was like a touchdown every 6 or 7 carries. It was stuff that you couldn't really see or visualize unless you went out and saw him. So he was really dominant, and I began to see, I think, the making of a player that would be one of the best running backs in the country, and obviously in college, and that's why we would project him as a first-round draft pick.
Yeah, certainly has always been successful, continues to be successful. He had 20-plus offers in high school, eventually signing with the Longhorns. So what do you remember about how that recruitment played out?
The highlight for me is that he had already committed to Ohio State, Emily. So this was a Buckeye through and through. He had been given, I think, already the playbook. He had already kind of studied things up. And he had given a silent commitment to Ohio State. He loved what they were building there. And imagine C.J. Stroud and Bijan Robinson in the same offense. That would have been something incredible to watch as well. But then he took one last unofficial visit to Texas, loved Austin, loved, I think, the vision for the program. Coach Herman at the time was there, and I think he felt like he could be a piece to bring Texas back. I know we joke a lot about it, but that's an important thing for recruits. They remember watching the Vince Young, Texas Longhorns, beating USC in the Rose Bowl, and with Colt McCoy and guys like that were rising and I think in a way making Texas one of those traditionally strong programs. So that was the thing that drew Bijan to Texas, is maybe being one of the players that helps that program go back into the stratosphere of the elite among college football. And yeah, the rest is history. He backed off that silent commitment to Ohio State, ends up choosing Texas. There were some rumors late in the process that he could flip and take a couple official visits both to the Los Angeles schools. He has a lot of family in Southern California. He was a huge Reggie Bush fan growing up, so USC made a strong charge there at the end as well. And then UCLA with Chip Kelly and what they were building early on in their recruiting class. So the Texas Longhorns were able to hang on, but it was a really eventful recruitment.
Sounds like it. So that's back when he was able to decide where he was going. Soon enough, somebody else will take care of that decision for him. Looking forward to see where he ends up. You also covered Dalton Kincaid, the Utah tight end. We'll, of course, likely hear his name in the first round. It sounds like it. But unlike Robinson, he was not a five-star coming out. So what stands out to you as you remember back to his playing days in high school?
Well, yeah, it was tough. I went out to a game in Vegas. He played at Faith Lutheran. They played Arborview. Arborview had a couple of four-star prospects. Faith Lutheran had a linebacker and Dalton Kincaid making some plays, but I think he was an afterthought. No one really saw, I think, the burst or the agility for him to be a big-time playmaker, and obviously he's developed into a great tight end. 16 catches in that game against USC in Salt Lake City last year, and really filled a huge hole once they lost a couple guys to injury and really catapulted his way. And there's a funny story. I have a 7-on-7 coach in Vegas who kind of joked with me and said, "Hey, you really messed up that ranking," because he was a 2-star, I believe, and or maybe not even ranked coming out of Las Vegas. And then he said, "Oh, and by the way, he never even made my 7-on-7 team, so he got cut from tryouts. So you're not the only one that messed that one up."
Wow. Yeah, see, hindsight is 2020, isn't it? There's a lot of 5-stars that we're going to talk about, but some of those guys that come up, those are the fun stories for sure. He eventually ended up a Ute, as we know. His options were kind of limited, though, coming out of high school. We just talked about it, but he actually signed with the University of San Diego. So how surprised were you that he went from this relatively unknown prospect to now a potential first-round pick?
Yeah, I think we were all surprised. And considering what I saw in high school, you just didn't really see that dominant playmaker, that guy with upside. And there are some players that just develop at a different rate. Maybe they grow later. They add the necessary muscle mass and the strength to be able to be dominant. He went over to San Diego and really took care of business and developed, and I think drew the attention of obviously the 2-time Pac-12 champions, and he's a big reason why they've won back-to-back crowns. And I think it's a good tale for other recruits, especially in the transfer portal era, where maybe the options aren't there right now because a lot of these Power 5 schools are filling some roster gaps going into Group of 5 or taking players that are already physically ready to help you. There's no shame and there's no, I think, knock on going to a place like San Diego, getting and producing and getting better, and potentially setting yourself up to go and shine at the Power 5 level, and then ultimately becoming what is now a projected first-round draft pick that Dalton Kincaid has developed into.
See, that's why I love that we picked these two prospects, two very different pathways, both likely ending up as first-round picks. There's a lot of different ways to get to this point, but these recruitments are really fun to go back and look at. If you guys are enjoying this too, please hit that like button. We would love to hear from you. We see lots of comments. We're going to answer some viewer questions in a little bit, but we're going to continue on with the show here. We're heading out to Arkansas. It is all about quality over quantity for the Hogs 2024 recruiting class so far. Still kind of early on in the cycle. Arkansas has 3 total commitments, but it is still ranked in the top 30 and hopes to reel in a few more big fish. And speaking of big fish, let's say hello to our friend Danny West from hogsports.com. Danny joining us here on the show. Danny, Fayetteville has seen some star-studded visitors lately, and that's going to continue David Stone headed that way this weekend. So how has this staff been able to draw such talent to campus and put themselves in the running for some of the top players?
Well, I think so much of it is just about effort. They've gone out and hired a brand new defensive staff for the most part, and I think those guys have been really impressive. They come in, they swing for the fences. They don't care if you're offered by Alabama or Clemson or whoever it might be. They're going to try to get you on campus, and so far they've been able to do that. I've never seen so many 5-stars visit Arkansas. This time of year, I want to say 8 of our 32 5-stars right now have already visited Arkansas, and that, of course, will jump to 9 tomorrow when David Stone arrives. So that's a very unusual number for us. We're not used to seeing Arkansas pull in that type of talent. But again, I think it comes down to just effort. Defensive staff has a lot to sell. Travis Williams comes in as a new coordinator. Marcus Woodson comes in, making a lot of noise so far, being able to attract these visits. Now, obviously, there's a big difference between visits and signatures, but so far they're on the right path, I think. You can't get signatures without visits, in my opinion.
Yeah, Danny, on that same point, we already know that this recruiting process in the modern era has been a bit more accelerated. I think laying the groundwork and laying the foundation in March and in April heading into the summer is so huge when that finish line is in December. So when you look at what Arkansas is doing in March and drawing some of these visits, how much impact do you think that will have in the long term?
Well, it could have a great impact. The funny thing about Arkansas, we all know it, guys, those who follow recruiting, Arkansas is not traditionally a team that attracts a lot of 5-stars. Let's just be honest. So in order to break down that wall, you've got to get the first one. Now, Arkansas has done a really good job of going through the transfer portal, picking up guys that used to be 5-stars as, high school prospects. So they're closing the gap in that regard, but it's just going to take 1 or 2 to get the ball going, I think. They're in the mix for like 8 or 9 of these guys. At some point, if you can just get that first one, I think it could have a lasting impact, but, that's easier said than done.
Danny, obviously you mentioned that Arkansas isn't really in the mix for some 5-stars, and it's rarely in that air. But they are in on a few guys, Williams and Nwaneri, KJ Bolden, obviously David Stone comes to mind as well. We will see
Sure.
where Aaron Noland ends up in the rankings. Who do you like Arkansas having the best shot at?
Of those 3, I'd probably go with KJ, to be honest with you. That's not to say Arkansas is the favorite by any means. As we know, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, all of those teams are in the mix there. But, if I had to pick one of those 3, Nwaneri hasn't been here probably in several months, a few months anyway. He hasn't made it back since the new defensive staff took over. So that one could be a little bit tougher. But, of course, KJ coming off that visit a couple of weeks ago, I felt like Arkansas made a really strong push. Again, Travis Williams, Coach Woodson, some of those guys have been on him hot and heavy now for a while. So, yeah, he would probably be my pick. Of course, we'll have to see how it goes with David Stone, a little bit early on that radar. I haven't seen him around here a lot, so let him get through that visit, and we'll see where it goes from there for David.
And Arkansas did make the top 7 for Aaron Noland recently. The 4-star quarterback intends to announce his college choice on April 8th. What's the buzz that you're hearing between the Hogs and Aaron Noland?
Yeah, I think they like their chances, but I'm not sure they love it at this time. They've kind of gone back and forth between 2 left-handed quarterbacks, which is uncommon to say the least. The other being KJ Jackson out of Mobile. He's expected to be here in a couple of weeks as well. So a lot of moving parts there. I know Aaron Noland had a really, really good visit here at Arkansas a few weeks ago, and of course Texas A&M, so many other schools right there in the mix too. So again, another Southeast prospect. It's been tough for Arkansas to break through that barrier and go out and get a guy like that. They did find Malachi Singleton last year, a 4-star out of the same state, quarterback out of Georgia, Kennesaw, Georgia, North Cobb High School last year. So, it can be done at Arkansas. We'll see how it goes with Aaron Noland. But right now, I would probably lean more toward Jackson being the guy if I had to make a guess as of today.
As we know, these things change quite a bit, but the visits certainly will not slow down this spring, this summer. So what do you think the ceiling is for this 2024 class that's currently ranked inside the top 30 with 3 commits?
You know, Emily, last year I thought they might be able to break in that top 15, and unfortunately for Arkansas, they weren't able to finish that strong, missed on a couple of defensive linemen there. So that's always key. If they can get a couple of D linemen, you know, it's hard to get 4- and 5-star D linemen out of the state. Arkansas being a state that doesn't produce very many of them to begin with, that always seems to be their hindrance. So quarterback and defensive line can go a long way, in my opinion, in recruiting rankings. So you asked what the ceiling was. I think top 15 is still doable for this year's class. They're hitting on all the right cylinders right now. They're getting the right guys on campus. Now it's a matter of getting them back again for a second, a third time, and then eventually work their way into December, you know, with a signature there. But long way to go. If I had to say what their ceiling might be for this year's class, I do think top 15 is still very much on the table for them.
First comes visits, then comes signature. Danny, thank you so much for joining us here. I appreciate it. For all things Hogs, be sure to check out hogsports.com for all the great and exciting recruiting news that is happening at Arkansas. It's that time. We're going to answer your viewer questions. You guys have sent in a lot of great ones. There's been a lot of commitment action happening. And so everybody wants to know kind of that trickle down effect and what happens if this guy goes here and this guy goes here. I want to know that same thing as well. But this first one here is from Hannah saying, with Duce and Dylan Raiola at the same high school, will Duce's decision impact Dylan's down the road? What do you think?
I mean, it could impact things. It wouldn't hurt the other school to obviously know that Duce Robinson will be there, and they have developed a friendship. They know each other. Actually, this is a little tidbit that no one really knows, but at Duce Robinson's game last year, Dylan Raiola was able to see him a couple times, and vice versa, right? I went out to go see Dylan Raiola on a Friday night, and guess who's on the Chandler sideline is Duce Robinson and his father. So it was obviously, I think, a relationship that they've been building. And I wouldn't be surprised if they end up at the same school by any means. I don't know if it's the huge factor or it's a thing that will sway the recruitment. But I don't think it could hurt to have a Duce Robinson potentially being in the ear of a Dylan Raiola and saying, hey, you know, look at me. I'm 6'6", 225. I can go up and get the football. I know you love to throw the football. Let's team up and actually play together. So they are at the same school, never got a chance to play football together. And if they end up doing so, you know, it'd be really interesting to watch.
I know fans love to follow the breadcrumbs and try to figure that out. But, I mean, we saw 2 twins split up in this past recruiting cycle. How often do you see that kind of package deal with high school teammates?
It doesn't materialize as much as I think fans want it to materialize. Mm-hmm. There are a number of times when recruits develop relationships because they go on these same visits together and they are interacting with each other on social media, and they develop friendships, right? I think they understand that they're all basically good at what they do, and that's playing football. And so I think they understand each other. They have those same bonds and those same connections. And for the most part, they like to say the right things and say, oh, yeah, I would love to play with him. But at the end of the day, everyone makes their own decision. It's independent of what other people are doing. It definitely helps when there are early commitments, because that commit can then pitch himself and pitch the program to other recruits. But for the most part, I think those friendships start to divide once you know, it's actually time for pen to meet paper.
I gotcha. I mean, you know, we think about it in our lives too, how many of our high school classmates that we're still in touch with. So it's definitely different, but I'm just curious how often that actually happens, because I hear that a lot. Like, does it help that they were high school teammates? It sounds like not quite so often. This next question, let's go to Harrison, asking 5-star Xavier Filsame just released a top 5. Do you like where Florida sits with him?
It sounds like he really likes the Gators. And when you think about positional fit and the need, that's what Florida needs, right? They need those heavy-hitting, strong, athletic safeties that can get into the box and make plays in space. This is one of the biggest risers in the new top 24/7 for the 2024 class. Just took a visit to Gainesville. According to our Blake Alderman, who does a great job of covering the Florida Gators over at Swamp 24/7, it does sound like the Gators are in line to draw an official visit from him this summer. Georgia is looming in the battle, and whenever you think about a strong defensive back with, immense upside on the defensive side of the ball, you have to like where Georgia sits. But if I were to hedge it, I would say Florida is right there. I think they made a tremendous impression based on everything that Blake Alderman has reported, and I think you have to like the chances to at least have a foot in the door with a player of his caliber.
There you go, Harrison. This next one is from Jason. Blair, who's the greatest high school player you have ever covered? Good luck with this one.
For me, it's DeAnthony Thomas, and he was nicknamed Black Mamba by Snoop Dogg. He played at Crenshaw High School, went on to Oregon, obviously got drafted and has had some time in the NFL as well. But I remember before social media was as big as it is now, the Instagram, the Twitter, the TikTok, this was a player that was going viral in the city of Los Angeles without, I think, that element of it, right? And right now it's so easy for a player to clip a nice play or something that goes viral and for him to post it and it gets 1 million views. And he was doing that before it was this easy, right? So I think I remember him and kind of just looking at him and what he was doing on the field, embarrassing opponents, dominating on every aspect of the game, whether it was running back, whether it was playing safety or corner, whether it was fielding punt returns and kick returns. There were times where his coaches had to slide him around the field just so he could make a play on the defensive side of the ball because the other team was going to throw the ball to the other side of the field. I remember just seeing him and thinking, man, like this guy is he's going to do big things. He was just so dominant, so explosive, and just a tremendous prospect. A close second for me would be Juju Smith-Schuster. He played at Long Beach Poly, and he had a high-profile recruitment as well, just like DeAnthony Thomas did. Ends up choosing USC over Oregon and Alabama and a few other schools, but another two-way talent who never took a snap off, would play receiver, would go score a touchdown, would then go play safety, would play linebacker, make tackles, make plays, and then he'd be right back out there playing wide receiver. So, yeah, those are two players from a few years ago that I would say are probably the best that I've seen on Friday nights.
Good to know. That's not what I was expecting you to say. I think a lot of people probably younger fans now recognize the name Juju Smith-Schuster. But DeAnthony Thomas was a little bit shorter, right? Like what? He was a smaller back?
Yeah, DeAnthony was probably 5'8", 5'9",
okay.
And
you
wouldn't expect him to make some of the plays that he was making. I remember the city section championship game. I think it was 2011. So this is 12 years ago inside the Coliseum at USC. It was a rainy December morning and it's muddy everywhere and everyone's slipping and sliding, but not DeAnthony Thomas. This guy had the length, the leg strength, the power, the explosiveness, and it was a sight to behold.
I like it. It's not about the size of the dog in the fight, right? We know we got a lot of football fans watching, but for basketball fans out there, 24/7 Sports is the place to be. We are on the road in Houston this week with 4 full days of live shows starting tomorrow at 3 o'clock Eastern. We got special guests, weekend analysts, live commitments, and fan Q&A all happening this weekend. Of course, surrounding the NCAA tournament. All right, for Blair Angulo, I'm Emily Proud, and this is the College Football Recruiting Show.